Hello Internet, this is your boy, Land War in Asia, and this is my demo commentary video that we are submitting to AGDQ for the Forgotten City. In case you don't know what the Forgotten City is, it's a very nice little adventure puzzle game that was released this year by Modern Storyteller for PC and consoles. It's actually based on a mod for an Elder Scrolls game, so if you happen to have played that, then you will probably have a good idea of what to expect here. But if not, let me give you a quick synopsis before we get started. The basic premise of the game is that the player character stumbles across a time portal while exploring some ancient Roman ruins in modern-day Italy. After entering the time portal, they find themselves transported back in ancient Roman times, when the city was still inhabited and not yet a ruin. After speaking with the local magistrate, you discover that the city is under the protection of a particularly capricious god who is actively enforcing a law known as the Golden Rule. The Golden Rule states that, quote, "The many shall be punished for the sins of the one," which in practice means that if anyone in the city commits a sin, then everyone in the city will be killed. With the assistance of a different god, the magistrate has managed to create a time portal that allows him, and by extension the player, to reset everything to the beginning of the day, which is fortunate given that somebody in the city is merely hours away from committing a sin that will get everybody, including the player, killed. The bulk of the game has to do with exploring the city and questioning the locals while you try to get a grasp on the situation and figure out how to avoid anyone breaking the Golden Rule. But if you or anyone else does, you can always just reset the day by going back through the magistrate's time portal. What's fun is that you can also utilize any items or knowledge you gain on subsequent loops to attempt to alter the outcome of certain events, but it is possible to reach every ending in the game without looping if you know what you're doing. The player's ultimate goal, really, is to find the means to escape the city and return to their own time, and the magistrate deduces that the only way to do this would be to create some sort of time paradox while in the past that would prevent the player from ever having discovered the time portal to begin with. There's 4 endings in the game, each conveniently numbered 1 through 4, depending on how you choose to create the paradox and what fate ultimately befalls the inhabitants of the city. For speedrunning, we typically run each ending as its own category, as they can have wildly differing routes. This run will be an all endings run, which is essentially a showcase category that we've invented, where we'll do all of the runs to all 4 endings back to back in order to show off the maximum amount of tech. I should also mention that this run will be done on version 1.1 of the game. 1.2 is the current version, which patched out several of the exploits we discovered and were using in the speedrun. Ironically enough, 1.2 actually introduced a couple of new exploits that actually make certain categories even faster than they were before, so some people, and by some people I mean myself, have been running the 1.2 routes, but I think most would agree that 1.1 has the most fun exploits, and so that's what we'll be using here. So let's go ahead and start a new game. When we start a new game, there's a short, unskippable cutscene followed by a fairly simple dialogue-based character creation process. For speedrunning, we usually load from a pre-made save immediately after the character creation process to save time and our sanity, but we'll let it play out here since it gives us a chance to go over a few things. During character creation, you're asked to choose a background, which is essentially a class. There's 4 available, but only 2 of them are of use to us for speedrunning purposes. The Fugitive class gives a bonus to movement speed while sprinting, which is good for obvious reasons, and the Soldier class starts with a gun and 10 bullets. For several categories, this is actually more useful than being fast, since you would otherwise need to source a weapon inside of the city, which actually ends up taking more time than you save from the increased movement speed in many cases. In 1.1 of the game, Soldier is the fastest for endings 1 and 3, Fugitive is the fastest for ending 4, and for 2, Soldier and Fugitive are basically tied. In all endings, we're allowed to do the endings in any order we like, but we're starting with 1 for simplicity's sake, and that means we took Soldier this time. After the character creation, there's a brief tutorial sequence where we run through the ruins of the city and listen to some narration from a character named Al, who came across the time portal before we did. After you've heard it for the 100th time, it kind of loses its charm, but you can read along with the subtitles to get a better idea of what's going on here. Once we reach the time portal, we'll be transported into the Forgotten City, and we'll start going after the first ending. Ending 1 is the easiest one to get, since you can achieve it pretty much immediately. You get Ending 1 just by killing the magistrate, Sentius. Since Soldier starts with a gun, we already have a way to do that, so we just have to find him in the city and shoot him. And fortunately, he always spawns in the same location. As soon as we gain control after the load, we're going to shoot the first person we see, Galerius, for 2 reasons. One is that doing so allows us to skip some dialogue with him, but more importantly, killing somebody immediately triggers the Golden Rule. And during the Golden Rule, Sentius begins to run from his initial spawn location in the villa towards the shrine we start at, so that he can reopen the time portal and allow us to reset the day. Obviously, having him running in our direction while we run towards him halves the amount of time it'll take to reach him. Galerius also carries a zip line that he normally gives you after a certain number of loops. Since we killed him, we just take it off his body and use it to cross the lake and reach Sentius faster. Sentius is actually invulnerable to damage until you're within a certain distance from him, so you have to make sure you're close before you start shooting, or else he just does a weird recoil animation and then continues running. Once he dies, we get kicked out of the city thanks to the time paradox, and we have a short dialogue with Al where we're made to feel bad for getting the worst ending, but no worries, we'll try harder next time.
The many shall suffer for the sins of the one.
With Ending 1 out of the way, we'll reset and start a new game for Ending 2. To mix things up, we'll go for the fugitive route this time. While we run back to the city, we can talk briefly about the route. Endings 2 and 3 are very similar in that both require you to figure out what's happened to Sentius's daughter, Scintilla. In a casual playthrough, you will probably eventually hear from somebody that she's gone missing after apparently trying to escape the city. You can find some skeletal remains in the cistern beneath the city that's wearing some jewelry that was known to belong to her, but the truth is that it's a deliberate misdirection on the part of Sentius, who has actually imprisoned her in the upper cistern to prevent her from escaping. In order to get into the upper cistern, you need to either find the key or obtain a golden bow. The key to the upper cistern is held by an NPC named Dooley, who has been imprisoned by Sentius for attempted thievery, which would violate the Golden Rule. If you speak to him, Dooley offers to give you the key if you can get him out of jail, but doing so requires completing a bunch of tasks in order to rig an election and install Galerius as the new magistrate. It's also possible to kill Dooley and loot the key from his body, but since this would trigger the Golden Rule and require you to loop, it actually ends up being quicker to go for the bow in some cases. Normally you get the golden bow by acquiring a regular bow from an assassin who infiltrates the city and then swapping that bow with a golden bow that you can find in the Shrine of Diana. But there's a number of dialogue sequences in the game where the game expects you to have already obtained a golden bow before you got there. And if we manage to sequence break into one of these sections, the game gets confused and gives you a temporary golden bow in order to allow you to progress through the dialogue. We call this a temp golden bow because if you ever unequip it, or talk to any NPCs, or try to load a save with it, the bow immediately disappears. One of the places the game expects you to have the golden bow is in the palace at the back of the city. An NPC named Nivea has locked herself inside the palace and is doing experiments on the golden statues that you see around the city. The only way into the palace normally is through an underground passage that only opens up once you've gotten the real golden bow from the Shrine of Diana, but there is a back door above the palace entrance that you normally come out of after you've completed the palace and met Nivea. Fortunately, there's a way for us to get up and into the back door and talk to Nivea without having to go through the rest of the palace. We do a photo jump right here to avoid falling damage, which is a nice little trick that gets used a couple of times in some of the routes. Photo jumping is basically jumping off a tall height, and right before you hit the ground and take fall damage, you press whatever key you've bound to photo mode, which is a nice little feature that normally lets you take screenshots, but it also cancels fall damage if you time it right. So we've just grabbed a few arrows out of that chest in front of the palace, and now we're going to climb up on an invisible wall and parkour across a couple of trees and roofs in order to get into the back door of the palace. It's just that easy. During the conversation with Nivea, we'll have some opportunities to threaten her with the golden bow, and if you do, the game will cause the player character to draw the golden bow and equip it, even if you don't actually have the golden bow in your inventory. As long as we don't talk to anybody or attempt to unequip the tent bow, we can use it for the rest of the run. Now that we have a golden bow, I should probably mention why we needed one to begin with. The golden bow has a magical enchantment that allows you to change certain things to gold by shooting them with it. One of these things is people, which isn't too useful as that triggers the golden rule, but the other thing you can do with it is turn patches of vines around the city to gold, which, for reasons that aren't entirely clear to me, make them climbable. In the lower cistern, there are several patches of vines that you can climb to access the upper cistern where Scintilla is being held without needing the key. So we just have to walk to lower cistern. Unfortunately, an NPC named Domitus will attempt to warn us about going into the cistern if we get close to this door, so we have to do a thing called Domitus skip, where we jump over his dialogue trigger by climbing on that brazier, and then we can just walk down into lower cistern. Once we make it into lower cistern, we just have to dodge this feral statue, and then use the golden bow to start climbing up to the upper cistern. Once we make it up there and talk to Scintilla, she'll tell us that she's found a way out of the city and ask us to release her. She suspects that escaping the city will cause the golden rule to trigger and get everyone else killed, and if we ask about getting everyone else to safety as well, she'll insist there's no time because Sentius is coming. For Ending 2, we just have to release her now and then deal with Sentius when he arrives.
You distract him. Stay right here and keep him talking while I look for something I can use.
What did you do with Scintilla? Where is she? So, you discovered my secret. So what? What are you going to do about it? Who? Scintilla? Where is she?
I'm right here, Father.
The many shall suffer for the sins of the one.
What's happening to
When Scintilla kills Sentius, we get kicked back to the present due to the time paradox, and we'll get to meet up again with Al. We can tell him about the escape route Scintilla found leading through the aqueduct, and then head back through that area to where we started the game. Once we pass through the aqueduct entrance, the screen starts to fade to black before loading into the next area. And if we turn around once the fade begins and jump into Al as he follows after you, it will actually conserve your momentum across the load and place you a little further ahead into the next area than if you had continued walking down the aqueduct or simply stood still. Now we just have to get back to Karen and let her know Al is safe. Karen is grateful that we found Al and will hand us a message that Scintilla left for us and then offers to take us back home. The Ending 2 screen clues you in on how you might get Ending 3 by asking a very leading question. What if you walked away from Scintilla instead of freeing her? Well, let's give it a try. Ending 3 simply requires that you talk to Scintilla twice, the first time to learn about her escape plan, and then again after you've managed to execute it. Normally this requires talking to her in the upper cistern, then looping to reset the day before Sentius arrives, and then on the next loop getting Garius to gather all the citizens near the cistern at the start before you go back and talk to her again. But we can actually get Galerius to help in the same loop by utilizing another trick called Galerius Skip that we'll go over in a minute. We could use essentially the same route for Ending 3 as we did for Ending 2, but for the sake of variety, we'll choose the Soldier route this time. In the Soldier route for Ending 3, instead of going for the temporary golden bow and using that to climb the vines in the lower cistern, we'll try to get Dooley's key to the upper cistern. Like I mentioned before, Dooley will give you the key if you can get him out of jail. It's also possible to shoot Dooley while he's in jail and loot his body for the key if you haven't triggered the golden rule yet. But then we would have to wait for Sentius to run back to the shrine and open the time portal again for us to loop. So it's not very fast. There's actually a quicker way to get the key from Dooley's body, and that's using a little glitch called Dooley's Skip. By shooting Galerius, as soon as we enter the city, we can activate the golden rule immediately, which starts Sentius running back to open the time portal as soon as possible. If you hadn't noticed yet, the golden rule causes the golden statues all around the city to come to life and start menacing the NPCs and shooting the player. All of the NPCs have a cowering animation that they use when the statues are attacking them, or if you happen to aim your bow at them. And if we can lure all the statues over to Dooley's cell and make him cower, you'll see that his cower animation has a strange quirk to it that we can take advantage of.
I'm somewhere on the other side. Consider this an invitation. Or a warning. Alworth.
The many shall suffer for the sins of the one.
In order to ensure the statues go by Dooley's cell and threaten him, we're actually going to help the statues by shooting some of the other NPCs if we happen to find them in the market, just so the statues don't get locked on them. Fortunately, this time, the statues did their job. And now we're going to wait here until we hear a voice line from Dooley indicating that he's being menaced by the statues. And now he's going to cower. And that's right, when Dooley starts his cower animation, he actually clips through the locked door of his jail cell, which causes it to immediately open. Then it's just a matter of shooting him and taking the key off his body. While we wait, we sort of have to body block so the statue's arrows don't accidentally hit him and turn him to gold and make him unlootable. But since we have the zipline from Galerius, we can just zip back to the portal, and it's already open thanks to Sentius. And now we just have to walk up to Upper Cistern and use Dooley's key to get in. Unfortunately, if we exit the shrine, Galerius will talk to us, and since we don't yet know about Scintilla's plan, we can't ask him to evacuate the villagers. The first time you talk to Galerius each loop's the only time you can ask him about that, so we have to find a way to avoid triggering his conversation and come back after we talk to Scintilla. Fortunately, we can glitch out of bounds in the Shrine of Proserpina and just walk past his dialogue triggers, and then come back once we know about Scintilla's plan. This time, we will ask Scintilla about saving the other villagers, and instead of releasing her, we'll tell her that we have to try and save everybody else. Now we just need to run back to Galerius and ask him to get everybody ready. Fortunately, there are a couple of zip lines we can use to make the return trip a little quicker. From From here, Ending 3 plays out pretty much the same as Ending 2 did, although since we picked Soldier instead of Fugitive this time, we can actually take care of Sentius ourselves during the confrontation, instead of having Scintilla get her hands dirty. His death animation from getting set on fire takes quite a bit longer than us just shooting him, so that's actually a sequence that's slightly faster with Soldier.
You distract him. Stay right here and keep him talking while I look for something I can use.
What did you do with Scintilla? Where is she? So, you discovered my secret. So what? What are you going to do about it?
I have his key.
The many shall suffer for the sins of the one.
Behind us. Hey!
With Sentius dead, we're again kicked back to the present, and we'll meet up with Al again before exiting through the cistern. The message from Scintilla at the end is slightly more optimistic in Ending 3 than it was in Ending 2, but there will still be a few people we didn't manage to save even with Galerius' help, such as Sentius and Dooley. Maybe we can do even better next time. The final ending, Ending 4, is the true ending of the game. To get it, you have to find a way to put an end to the Golden Rule once and for all. The way to do that is to confront Pluto, who is the god that is enforcing it. To find Pluto, we have to enter the Great Temple, which is the large structure we passed by on the way to Upper Cistern in Ending 3. Its doors are locked, and the only way to unlock them normally is to do a bunch of side quests to find the 4 plaques which you place on an obelisk in front of the temple. Once all 4 of the plaques have been placed, the front door to the Great Temple will unlock, and you can walk in and meet Pluto. But finding the plaques in a casual run takes an awful long time, and gaining access to the temple without the plaques was probably the first piece of speed tech that was ever theorized for this game. It was immediately obvious to everybody that if we could find a way to do that, it would save a ton of time in the route. And fortunately, after only about 10 days of the game being released, we were able to find what we now call Temple Skip. How Temple Skip works is that inside of the temple there is a loading trigger on the ground, which you pass over when you go inside, that shuts the door behind you and deloads the city, so that it can load in the area where Pluto is. In version 1.1 of the game, that loading trigger is actually slightly larger than it needs to be, and extends slightly outside of the physical walls of the temple. What that means is that we can hit the trigger to load the final area of the game without ever actually going inside of the temple. Unfortunately, when the city deloads, so too does the ground you're standing on. So what we have to do is actually jump into the deload trigger so that we're airborne when the city deloads, and carry enough momentum through the load that we can grab onto a ledge that appears after the load is done. It sounds complicated, but we actually have a very simple and reliable setup for Temple Skip, and you can also quick save before you try it just in case you miss it. In a sheer stroke of luck, the ledge that appears is exactly within jumping range, and a nearby wall has no collisions, so we can just pop back in bounds behind the second door of the temple.
Consider this an invitation or a warning.
It's just that easy. Now we have to go through a couple of doors in which we speak the various names of Pluto: Hades, Osiris, and Nergal. Oh yeah, Pluto lives in outer space, by the way. To his left, you can see his bride Proserpina, who is frozen in an ice cube for some reason. She's been the whispery voice communicating with us the whole time, trying to help us get here, as well as the one responsible for Sentius's time portal. Pluto has a lot to say, and it's here we realize the ginger woman we meet at the start of the game is in fact Karen, the mythological figure responsible for ferrying the souls of the dead across the river Styx. So, we're dead, apparently, or something. She doesn't recognize us either, since technically we haven't met her yet. Isn't time travel great? If you pick the right dialogue options, you can convince Pluto that the Golden Rule is unjust and should be abolished. If you fail to convince him or make him mad, you can always just run back to the city and jump in the time portal and try again. How convenient. Once you convince Pluto to abolish the Golden Rule, you are warped back to the present, as you've caused a time paradox. We'll meet up with Al one last time, and then run back and tell Karen the good news. The true ending has one extra scene that occurs after heading back to Karen. You can also confront her during this dialogue about the fact that she is who she is, but it takes a long time, so we won't do it here. But then we're teleported 1 year into the future, or maybe time just progressed normally. And here we go to a museum exhibit, apparently headed by Al, about Roman mythology. And all of our friends from the city are here. You can check in on everybody and figure out what became of them after they were freed from the city. But of course that takes too much time, so we'll just run straight to the end for one last conversation before the credits.
Good.
And here we finally meet Proserpina face to face.
Well done, my friend.
And all the other inhabitants of the city that we managed to save by undoing the Golden Rule. The statue in the middle there actually changes depending on whether or not you chose to play as a male or female character at the beginning of the game. And that's it. That is an ending run of the Forgotten City 1.1. I just want to take a minute to shout out all of the members of the Forgotten City speedrunning community. Without their hard work and diligence in finding tech and grinding out runs, I wouldn't be able to show you this run. So thanks to them. And I think that's all I've got for you today. So thanks so much for watching, and have fun.